Hello and welcome to the Sky Blue Times YouTube channel. Today I wanted to talk through the win against Bournemouth. In the context of this season, matches against Spurs where City have struggled to deal with teams that are going to press man-to-man, be really aggressive higher up the pitch. I think this was an important step in the right direction to show that City do have the tools to be able to beat those teams. I think when you look at last season, there's performances in there that show that Guardiola really does have a good understanding of how to beat Iriola. But this new version of City, the new players coming in, the way they've been this season, had their kind of ups and downs. I think it's really good performance. And I don't know about you guys watching the video, but this game felt more like what a traditional kind of top six match would feel like, where you have the really dangerous players on the pitch. Both teams are looking to press, that are able to get up and down the pitch and so on, rather than what we've kind of become accustomed to from the other kind of traditional top six teams, where you think where City do play some of the teams like Arsenal, Liverpool, Man United, Chelsea, etc. And Bournemouth are in really good form. I think they were second in the table before this match, which City now have moved into. Really good run of results for them. They look like if they can keep all their players fit, then a European place is certainly possible. Even if it's not Champions League, you're looking at Europa League for Bournemouth would be tremendous for them to achieve this season. And for this team going into Dortmund midweek, big Champions League match, Liverpool, the final match at home before we go away for the international break, absolutely huge to come away with this win. And as we'll touch on later in the video, many players that came on and gave good performances. Shirky starting the match, I think, was a bit of a surprise for some people. Myself, a little bit unsure on the kind of best combination of how you fit him in, whilst bearing in mind that Semenyo is a big threat. We're still, as good as Matheus Nunes has been, you're still wondering, does he need a little bit more support against Semenyo? As I've just mentioned, dealing with man-to-man press, what are your options there? So trying to figure out that kind of right combination of when to move Shirky into the team. Definitely had a fair few people debate him, but then by the time we get to the end of this match, I think he's really put his marker down to say, even if I'm not a guaranteed starter right now, I'm going to work my way to being that player by the time we get to the end of the season, till we get to that March, April, May time, especially when you're looking at the performances of Savinho, the performances of Oscar Bob, players that aren't really at that point in the final third where they are decisive. And as Guardiola mentioned with Oscar Bob, when he realises that he can be one of the best players in the world, then Oscar Bob will play like a completely different player, because he's able to get into the box so many times, and he does everything kind of leading up to that final decision, final action really, really well. But then, as you've seen with his kind of recent performances, that's kind of trended in the wrong direction, I think, as he's lost that confidence. But Shirky is not a player that is lacking in confidence. I think that will benefit a lot of the players in the team to see somebody that, quite frankly, just doesn't care what is going on around him. Like he doesn't feel that pressure, like we've seen from maybe somebody like Florian Wirtz or Xavi Simons coming in as number 10s to the Premier League. He just doesn't seem fazed by anything going on around him. So yeah, really, really, really encouraging. If we just move over to this next one here, just to give you an idea of the setup, the plan, etc. So Nico was quite happy to drop in between the two centre backs, and then Diaz and Guardiola would split. I do think, and I'm not seeing many people mention this, but I do think the decision was made to not try and do much of the build up through the two centre backs. So Guardiola, excellent player, certainly on the ball, would be able to build out from the back very well. But then, if you're trying to use Vardio and Diaz a lot, they're the kind of two obvious players for Bournemouth to press high up the pitch. So it was more so looking at your Nico, your Bernardo Silva, etc., Phil Foden dropping on that left-hand side. That was more so what they were looking up to try and build through the press. So Nico would drop in between. You did see at times when Bournemouth pressed, Phil Foden would drop over to this zone here. O'Reilly would push up. On the other side, you have Silva that's dropping out over here. Nunes that would push up. And this all allowed the rotation on the two sides. So you have this on the right hand side, and I don't know if I mentioned this in a previous video, but because of how well the left has looked, you're now going over to the right side thinking, right, how can we get a kind of really good rotation going on, relationship between different players. In this game, we saw Bernardo Silva drop in more towards being that kind of right centre back, right back in possession zone, Matheus Nunes would really push up, and then Shirky is allowed to drift inside and be between the lines. And as long as City had the ball, he was very much acting as if he would be as an attacking midfielder, a number 10. And that's a really important thing to kind of remember when you're looking at fitting in some of these players. I know people spoke about how does he combine Phil Foden and Shirky. This guy needs to play as a 10, this guy needs to play as a 10. But it needs to be like for the specific phases, for the areas of the pitch, etc. When we've got the ball, then you want to get these players in the right positions. So you want to get Phil Foden, Shirky in the middle. But when you're talking about out of possession, then that's a little bit of a different story. There's not a need to have Shirky play in the middle, defending the double pivot next to Rodri, etc., or be alongside Haaland in the first line of the press. It's about once we do have the ball and we're in possession, we need to use that creative ability of Shirky in the middle. His just to be so comfortable using both feet, like takes the free kick with one and then provides assist with the other foot. You want that in the middle of the pitch to open up more angles to him. But that's all built around when we're in possession rather than out of possession. So yeah, back to it anyway. Got a little bit off track there. But on the right hand side, so you've got Shirky moves inside, Silva drops back, Nunes pushes up. I think Matheus Nunes had a really solid game dealing with Semenyo 1v1, just a lot more kind of solid in the box, as if he's kind of clocked that he does have the speed to get back, he does have the strength to go shoulder to shoulder with any of the players, with the kind of more talented wingers, but he needs to not be erratic in the box, and he doesn't need to force the issue, he just needs to react. So you can get beat by Semenyo, but it's not that you then need to panic and try and put a challenge in right away. It's that I've got the speed, let me get back, recover, get into the right position, and manage the situation that way, arriving into the box, being in a good position to go shoulder to shoulder and stand your ground, rather than a need to make a decisive challenge and slide in. And that's what he's done really well in the most recent games. So yeah, as I mentioned, Nico would drop in. You saw more in the second half that the centre-backs would split wider and wider, which just increased the pressing distance for the Bournemouth players. Part of the reason when you have Phil Foden dropping into the left side, Bernardo Silva, as you see in the scrap it, dropping in onto that right-hand side, is that you're changing the players that Semenyo, Krupi, etc. have to press, and then you're also stretching the distances. So Silva would be really quite conscious of not being really tight to Diaz, so that then you're not putting both of them in the way of that Bournemouth press. You're just pulling Semenyo further and further out, opening up the gaps and make it difficult for them to really kind of put a lot of pressure on City when they're on the ball. On the left-hand side, similar to what we've seen, Nico Riley, Jeremy Doku moving inside, but this was more in the middle third, in the build-up, when they're looking to kind of progress the ball through the pitch, rather than once we've kind of pinned teams back, and then Nico Riley can provide the width and Jeremy Doku can move inside. So Doku really, when you're looking at his touch maps, I'll show you in a minute, looks a lot like a number 10. I don't think it's something that many wingers can do, the strength that he does have to be able to hold the ball off, back to play, back to pressure, and then able to turn. And then also from that, I think his passing ability is quite underrated. Somebody that, if you think about those kind of performances where he's playing alongside Kevin De Bruyne, makes the run ahead of him on the ball, off the ball, and then Doku's able to pick him out. I think it's the 6th minute, he plays a pass between 3 different players from around this left-hand side into the box for Phil Foden, who could have squared it to Haaland, decides to go for a shot. Taking that extra touch just meant that the shot ended up being blocked. But he does have a really good eye for a pass, and then he does have chances like the one for Erling Haaland that Haaland ends up missing. I think that's around 37th minute that was. Misses that one. There's the kind of dribble through the middle of the pitch after he receives the ball and turns, and then it plays again Nico O'Reilly as well, and he tries to do it, but then it's cleared off the line, I think, by Jimenez, and Phil Foden was just arriving. Then that was right the 31st minute. But they're two like really good passes in behind from Jeremy Doku, and and really should be kind of rightly fuming that he didn't get an assist for at least one of those. And I think that's really good to see the frustration on the players to not get the numbers that they are pushing to contribute. And I think it's also a reminder that you have to be very careful when you're having these conversations about players not doing enough, not having an assist for Erling Haaland. Like, you look at this game and Doku easily could have had 2 assists. He created a really good chance for Phil Foden, for Haaland and O'Reilly in that match. So he's definitely somebody that is creating chances, functioning really well within the team. But then if you're just looking at the end of the game, did you get an assist, did you get a goal? It doesn't paint the correct picture of how the match went and how his performance was. But yeah, so City wanted to pull Bournemouth in. They wanted to bait that press. So once the likes of Krupi, Tavernier, Semenyo, etc. are pushed up, and then you want to entice the other players, the midfield, to push up as well. And then City were able to find a space between the lines, whether it is to Phil Foden, Cherki. And then the kind of knock-on from that is then, because the midfielders are getting outnumbered, the central defenders now have to jump up to try and support the midfielders. The fullbacks were instructed not to follow the wingers inside in the first half. So by them staying back, the centre-backs need to jump up. And then as soon as the centre-back jumps, you now have the space for Erling Haaland to attack and run in behind, which you saw for the 2 goals in the first half, which we'll touch on a little bit later. Then in the second half, Iraola instructed his fullbacks to follow the wingers inside, and then that had the knock-on effect of now Nico O'Reilly and Matheus Nunes are going to have a lot of space, which should be a bit of a reminder for you of how the FA Cup game went. When you think about Nico O'Reilly coming on, Kusanov come on, O'Reilly was really getting forward down on that left-hand side, having lots of joy, and that led to City winning that game. I think it was 2-1, if I remember right. But O'Reilly was a big portion of that, because with the way that Bournemouth was set up to press under Iraola, leaving all that space out wide, and then bringing on a player that can take advantage of that space. We'll just move over to this one here. This is the touches, as I mentioned, with Jeremy Doku. This is not the touches that you would expect from a winger. I don't think there's many wingers that can play that kind of role. Moving inside, do you think, could Savinho drop into the pockets and be like that between the lines? I'm not entirely sure. And then when you're looking at other wingers around the leagues in Europe, it's quite a different role to what you'd expect. And so, yeah, between Doku, Phil Foden and Cherki, you had all of those guys between the lines, 3 different options of players that were able to receive the ball, turn and create a chance to play passes in behind, as well as combine between each other like they did for the goals. And then, yeah, if you're looking at this from a Bournemouth point of view, you really are struggling on who you need to try and deal with. It's not like it's not like before, where you're thinking that supply line from De Bruyne for Erling Haaland is just so dangerous. We need to stop that supply line. But in this match, it was one of these guys is going to be able to find Erling Haaland, Nico O'Reilly, etc. One of them's going to be able to turn and play that passing behind. It wasn't just a case of stopping one player. So if we just move over to the first goal, I haven't got this in the video, but it does start from a Bournemouth cross, I think from Brooks. Diaz clears it, and then Phil Foden heads it down to Erling Haaland. Haaland then first time passes it to Nico Gonzalez, and then Nico on the ball, pauses, takes his time. Player comes towards, as you can see, I think that's Alex Scott that's come towards him there. Doku there, Foden between the lines. And you can see Cherki is in the space between the Bournemouth midfield and defensive line. And Nico picks that pass over to the top to Cherki. Haaland, actually, if I bring it back, as soon as Nico's going to play that, Haaland is already turned, ready to make his run. And you can see Diakite that has jumped up to go with Erling Haaland there to support that Bournemouth midfield. And then, yeah, that header from Cherki over the back of the Bournemouth back line. You've only got Truffert that's going to make that run. I think that's Senesi there that's gone up towards Cherki. And then you've just got all that space, as I mentioned earlier in the video, for Erling Haaland to attack. Heads it down right in front of him to be able to continue his run. Goes into the box. Interestingly, when you watch it back on the video, it's only a small detail, but he takes a little touch and moves towards the right side when he's running towards goal, which then leaves that ankle still open for the near post that he finishes with his left foot. And then another thing I wanted to mention with this is the kind of passes you need to give early on in behind. I feel like in comparison to pretty much every other striker out there, it doesn't need to be perfect. You just need to get it into the space. So Cherki just yeeted it over the top with his head He doesn't need to make this a perfect pass into the right space for Erling Haaland to take a really nice first touch and away you go. Erling Haaland will just make it work. And then if we just move over to the second goal, you see a similar sort of thing. So really good Nico Gonzalez, again involved in the build-up to this goal. Plays it between the lines to Phil Foden. You can see Scott has jumped onto O'Reilly. O'Reilly's actually just going back out wide. There's a bit where him and Doku talk between each other that one needs to go. And then O'Reilly starts to move out over to this side. You can see Vardiel's moved out to cover that space as Nico Gonzalez did drop in between the two centre-backs. So yeah, plays that pass into Phil Foden. And then if you watch on this next one here, so you've got Adams here. And then onto the next one, they drop to anticipate Shirky going to turn and run. Phil Foden plays it first time to Shirky, and then Shirky just first time over the top. And Senesi, you can see here, as I mentioned at the start of the video, he jumps up as that centre-back to try and deal with that midfield overload. Because Scott has gone, he's then supporting, backing him up by jumping onto Phil Foden. And then by jumping onto Phil Foden, he's now left the space in behind that Erling Haaland can attack. And then, yeah, beautiful ball over the top by Shirky. Goes over. Erling Haaland takes that touch. Another small detail that Erling Haaland does in this is he takes the touch and goes across the front of Diakite. So this now stops. If he went straight towards goal, so if he just carried on straight down, Diakite's already in motion at full speed. He'll probably be able to try and put in a recovery challenge before Haaland even reaches the box. As fast as Haaland is, he'll still try and put in a challenge. But by cutting across in front of him, he removes that from happening. And then also he slows down Diakite from reaching the 6-yard box as he's trying to be there to clear it off the line if Erling Haaland does end up taking a shot. So he goes across the front of him, goes wide with the keeper, and then as Petrovic dives is when Erling Haaland curls it underneath him and into the goal. And as you can see, Diakite is just too far away to be able to clear that off the line. And then I believe that's Phil Foden there is making that second run into the box. And that is another thing to bear in mind. So they don't just have, obviously Erling Haaland is that major threat in behind. O'Reilly did a really good job in this game, and more so in the second half. O'Reilly and Nunes were doing those kind of runs, attacking the back line. But also Phil Foden being that kind of second runner that's going behind the Bournemouth midfield line, that's arriving into the box. I think Phil Foden did a really good job in this game. He was very unlucky to not get a goal from these kind of actions. You think about the O'Reilly chance in the first half. If that's not cleared off the line, then Phil Foden is the guy right there ready to tap that in and gets the goal. But in a number of these sequences, you see Phil Foden arriving nicely into the box, into a good position, and I'm sure in future games he'll get goals from that kind of run. And then this is one is for the third goal. I don't know if you've seen the video, but you would have if you checked out the Premier League page of Guardiola's blowing kisses to Phil Foden after this, because he receives on his weak foot on the half turn, plays it over to O'Reilly really nicely in space. So Shirky plays that first pass. Again, that's that kind of space in and around the Bournemouth midfield. Plays that pass into Phil Foden, and then as you see, as the players come in towards him, O'Reilly is now the player that has all the space over on that side. Plays that pass over to Nico O'Reilly to continue his run. You can see Matheus Nunes on the other side that is now getting the space to try and get in behind Bournemouth as well. Not followed up by Semenyo. And you can see Erling Haaland here. I think that's another little kind of small detail. Him being here means that Diakite can't close Nico O'Reilly down, so he has to stay there in case O'Reilly passes to Haaland. And obviously in his mind, that is the player most likely to get that pass rather than O'Reilly taking a shot, so he's got to cover that. And what O'Reilly does so well is he shapes his body up to initially take the shot on the edge of the box. You can see the Bournemouth player there. Senesi goes to make a block on that shot. You can see the goalkeeper already starting to lift himself off his toes, anticipating a shot. And then O'Reilly continues into the box and takes that shot over into the far corner. So yeah, just really small details there from Haaland. From O'Reilly, that makes the goal. I think if he takes that shot first time, unlikely he scores it. Much tougher shot to make, but by going into the box after the fake shot is really what makes it for Nico O'Reilly. And great to see his performances up. Somebody that's really solid, defending 1v1, particularly kind of tackling dribblers out wide. I think when it comes to aerial duels, really being dominant in those situations, he's got lots of improvements to make. Being deep in the build-up, similar to like how you would see Nuno Mendes play for PSG, be deep in the build-up and pick the passes out. I think that kind of role from O'Reilly is something you want to see him develop in the future. But from everything we are seeing in terms of really being aggressive, getting up high up the pitch, wide, moving inside to go alongside the number 6 that we've seen in previous games. Just very encouraging stuff. Shirky arriving to the box, Matheus Nunes arriving, coming towards that back post as well, so he's there as an option. Really good stuff to see in this one. Should mention that Bournemouth had 2 good chances with Krupi. I think they started the first half with a kind of good amount of momentum. Definitely a forward to keep an eye on. Somebody that's really quite shifty. He did a good job of hiding kind of in the blind spot of Ruben Diaz, of Josko Vardiol, and then has that kind of pace to arrive into the box. So that I think if you're a Bournemouth fan is very encouraging. A player that I don't, if he continues that kind of form, is not going to stick around at Bournemouth for many years. But apart from that, I think City really did have Bournemouth figured out. Once you go 3-1 up, different game, changes the game state, much more comfortable for City to then sit off. And Bournemouth are a team that just don't have the strengths at breaking teams down when they're sat deep and being compact. So yeah, much easier for City to kind of manage that game in the second half. And then that's why you see the possession stats, City having less than 50% of the ball, is just kind of indicative of the kind of approach that we're seeing by City in these type of games, like what we saw against Manchester United, a little bit of what we saw against Arsenal, definitely something that we've seen in this game against Bournemouth. Expect it's something that we'll see again against Liverpool next weekend. So yeah, and then a few other things I wanted to mention. Nico Gonzalez, for me, this was his best performance for Manchester City this season. We've seen the defensive actions be really impressive, but this game it was all about what he was able to do on the ball. The first 2 goals, he's involved in the build-up. He's decisive in those 2 goals, as well as all he was doing with recovering the ball, being in the right position in the middle of the pitch. Yeah, really encouraging stuff to see, especially when you think back to that moment after the Huddersfield match where people are talking about the conversation between him and Pep, and bizarrely people thought that was a negative. But if you remember what he was talking about, it was knowing when to kind of turn on the ball and play those quicker passes forward, and we're really starting to see that over the last couple of games. So yeah, that's great to see from Nico Gonzalez. A few other things I wanted to show you before we finish up on the video. This is Erling Haaland's cumulative XG and goals across the Premier League season 25-26, the opening 10 games. Only recently is he beginning to kind of outperform his XG, but it's important to remember that he is getting lots of chances every single game. I think he's still over 1 non-penalty XG per game, which no player in Premier League history has managed to do for a full season, but he's on track to do that so far. And it's not necessarily that we're creating these like kind of like every chance is a really big chance, but he's getting good chances 4, 5, 6 times a game now. That you would think, like, the impression would be he's really clinical, but actually he's scoring 2 really good 1v1s, but then he's in a few games having 4 of those. So he's just getting more and more opportunities to score goals. You've got players like Shirky that can come on in the second half. Marmoush come on in the second half of games this season and create chances and score goals. So when you're looking at kind of the depth of quality on the bench, as well as the kind of variety of players within the team that can create for him, it's not just a case of we need to stop De Bruyne finding Erling Haaland between the lines and playing him through to be 1v1. Josko Vardiol can chip a ball over the top. Nico Riley can provide a really nice kind of lofted cross into the middle of the box. Matheus Nunes can drive it across the 6-yard box to be tapped in. Rico Lewis can make those runs between in the half space into the box and square it for Erling Haaland. You've got Phil Foden that could chip a ball over the top. You've got Shirky that can just with his head chip it over the top in behind for him to run onto. There's just so many different ways that this team is able to create for Erling Haaland this season, which is why I'm quite confident about the way that this is going to go for him in terms of maintaining this goal scoring rate. If we move on to a couple of other things, this is since 2020-21 season, this is the top 4 defenders by minutes for Manchester City, and then the aerial duel win percentage of those 4 players that play the most minutes. And as you can see, when you're looking at last season, and which was the first season under Guardiola that City have had less than 50% aerial duel win percentage as a team in a Premier League season. They had 48.1, whereas this season is around 58, so really big improvement. But if you're looking at the 4 guys that play the most, you've got Rico Lewis playing a lot of minutes at a right back, somebody that's not able to win a lot of aerial duels. This is Manuel Akanji down here. You can see in previous seasons Akanji there. If Akanji's playing as your centre back and he's not able to deliver more than a 50% aerial duel win percentage, that's a problem. And the last 2 seasons before this one, he was playing mostly as a centre back. Ruben Diaz, somebody that is not going to be putting up dominant kind of figures in terms of 70-80% aerial duel win percentage, like a Virgil van Dijk and some of the other players that are a bit more dominant in the air. So then if you're pairing somebody like Ruben Diaz with someone like Manuel Akanji, who's just not as dominant either, then that's going to be a real problem. You're going to struggle to win a lot of those aerial duels. Whereas this season, much improved. You've got Josko Vardiol here, just over 60%. Ruben Diaz, I think, is on 57-something%. Nico Riley down here, 48%. And then you've got Matthias Nunes as well. He's around 56-57 sort of percent range as well. So as I mentioned a bit earlier with Riley, that's something for him to improve. Could definitely get that up. He's got that kind of frame that he should be able to become a more dominant in the air defender, fullback. But to see that from Josko Vardiol, Ruben Diaz, Matthias Nunes that are playing a lot of the games for City is a big improvement to what we saw from last season, and is more in line from what we've seen in previous seasons. Even you think with these 3, you've got Akanji there, but you've got somebody like John Stones, Ruben Diaz, Kyle Walker, much better in the air. Even with that season, Laporte, Ruben Diaz, Cancelo, John Stones that season. They're definitely heading in the right direction, and there's just kind of no escaping that you need your defenders to win their duels, particularly with the way the Premier League is right now. This is I think I probably would have shown this one in a previous video, but this is the percentage of touches by thirds for City last season in the Premier League as a 8-game rolling average, and then these dotted lines are the average from this Premier League season after 10 games. And I just wanted to show the kind of shift in the way that City are playing. So last season they really wanted to squeeze teams high up the pitch, almost felt like that was the only option that they had. And particularly the start of the season, as you can see here, more final third touches than you're getting. A bigger percentage of your touches are final third rather than middle third, which tells you a lot about how high City were pushing teams up the pitch. And then that drops down throughout the season to a more kind of like expected level, and then you obviously get the more kind of stable version of Manchester City towards the back end of the season in 2025. If you look at City this season, which will be through the dotted lines, your percentage of final third touches, they've been increasing bit by bit over games, but that's still lower than the kind of lowest level that you saw from last season. I'd expect by the end of this season, the green and purple, the defensive third and the middle third, defensive third and final third would have swapped. But as you can see here as well, the defensive third, that's as high as we saw the kind of peak area from last season. And then you're looking at the middle third touches, they're amongst the highest that we saw from City last season. So it's early, it's 10 games in, but the main kind of point I wanted to make with this is that they're possessing the ball much more in the middle third rather than they are pushing teams deep into the final third, squeezing teams up the pitch. We just move over to this one here. This is the 8-game rolling average for XG and XGA from City all comps this season. As you can see, much better than what we would have seen from last season. I think at this point last season, the two lines were beginning to touch, and there wasn't really any gap between them as the chance creation was coming down, and City were giving away so many chances every single game. A big part of this kind of lift up here is the Spurs and Brighton games. They both were over 2 XGA per game, so that really has bumped that up. And then as more and more games have been played, that's dropped down. But seeing that gap, and hopefully you want to see the XG stay above 2. You want to see the XGA stay around this kind of level, 0.8. Anything lower is really, really impressive, and that's Arsenal are more like 0.6, 0.4, that kind of range. But hovering around 0.8 is more than enough for a team that wants to win the Premier League title. And you want to see that big gap between those two lines across the Premier League season consistently. But yeah, that brings me to the end of the video. A few different things there. I think I'm beginning to kind of run out on my voice side. I think I have much more for you. Impressive performance. Hopefully they continue that into the game against Dortmund, into the game against Liverpool. Touch on a lot of stuff there. I think really impressive from Shirky. Great to see the continuation of chances that we're creating for Erling Haaland. Phil Foden is very much a midfielder. Nico Gonzalez feels like the 6 that that a few people thought he could be. He is definitely showing that week in, week out now. And I think players like Ruben Diaz, Josko Vardio are just steadily going along, putting in really solid performances. Matthias Nunes, really solid as a right back. Nico Riley looks like somebody that could get into the England squad next season if he continues this kind of trajectory of performances. So yeah, hopefully we see this continue against Dortmund. That will be a tough match. They are a good team. They have only lost this season to Bayern Munich away from home. That's their only loss of the season. Play 5 at the back, going to be difficult to break down. Champions League, you've always got players that can hurt you. And then Liverpool have just got that win against Aston Villa to start to turn around their form. Tough match against Real Madrid that's coming up tonight as I film this video. But yeah, that'll be a huge one to win as we go into the next international break. Let me know your thoughts down below, things that you think I've missed out. Make sure you like the video to help support the channel. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on the next video. And we'll be back with plenty more content this week.